Most of you already know that because you read the flyer to get here. There are a couple things I want to tell you. One is whenever you see me duck down, I'm not trying to avoid flying bullets. My water is down here. Since this is an experience to share, I wanted to tell you just a little bit in general about myself. One of the things is the fact that today is one of those days whenever I'm experiencing my North Carolina sniffles. So I'm not being emotional here or wiping away tears. It's just my sniffling experience. I grew up in the northern panhandle of West Virginia. I tell you that because people are always wondering where I'm from, because now I have a charming accent. For 12 years, I had a very bad speech impediment, so this is what's left of it. But I could always win those games at carnivals where they try to guess where you're from. I always got a big stuffed bear because they could never guess the northern panhandle of West Virginia. I lived for the first 7 years of my life in a holler back in West Virginia, and they call it a holler. It's really a holler, not a hollow, because whenever you live in a holler, because of the acoustics of the mountains, you could just holler from one house to the other. I was the very first one in my family to graduate from college, and I was working on my doctorate in English when I was hired as a professor of English and drama by a community college in the University of Kentucky system. During the interview, they asked if I could set up a drama program. I was working on a doctorate in English. I would have told them I could do anything. So I said, sure. And then I did. I also was working on my doctorate in higher education administration when I became the academic dean at Hazard Community College, which was also a part of the University of Kentucky system. I was 28 years old and one of the youngest academic deans in America at the time. I finished my doctorate in higher education administration at Vanderbilt University. And shortly after that, God called me to the ministry. I told God he could have done that before I racked up all those debts from Vanderbilt University. I've served churches in Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Michigan, Tennessee, and now here at Montpelier Presbyterian Church in Wagram, because I'm not good at retirement. I also suffer from medically resistant major depression disease, along with PTSD and an anxiety disorder. I don't fit the stereotype, but that's because no one fits the stereotype. I'm speaking about it today because depression is a common disease that we have, but it's frequently not talked about by the people who suffer from it because there's still a stigma attached to mental illness. Those who suffer from depression or another form of mental illness may feel very isolated or alone. They may feel that others will think less of them if they only knew, or they feel less themselves because they think they ought to be able to overcome the disease or make themselves feel better just by their own self-efforts. My prayer is that this talk will help not only give you some information about depression, but will let you know that if you have it, you are not alone. And I hope it will give those of you who may have friends or relatives who suffer from depression a greater understanding of the disease and how to help them. I've made up cards that are in the back that have numbers on them. One of the numbers is for the Suicide Prevention Hotline. That's actually misnamed. It's the Suicide and Mental Illness Crisis Hotline. They're a hotline for anyone who is experiencing a crisis or really needs to talk to someone in that very moment. You don't have to be suicidal to call this hotline. You just need to talk, and to talk then with somebody who's qualified. It also gives you the NAMI helpline, the Scotland Family Counseling Center phone number, and there's a association that is well known and very well thought of called the Anxiety and Depression Association of America, and their website lists online support groups, and those support groups have been juried, so they're legitimate support groups. And periodically, a counselor goes in to make sure that they're following the guidelines of the association. So they're not scams and they're not run by people who have absolutely no idea what they're doing. I also obviously have written notes for this talk because there's so much information I want to give you. And if you would like a copy of the notes when this is over, or you know somebody who would appreciate a copy of the notes, just let me know and I'll be glad to get them to you. The first thing I want to say is that depression is not the same thing as sadness. You may feel sad with depression, but the two things can also be very different. Sadness is generally situational, and it lasts for a relatively brief period of time, days, weeks, sometimes just hours. Our normal sadness isn't to be downplayed or thought of as unimportant. We need to pay attention to it and do what we need to do to deal with it. Sometimes when you're sad, you just need to take some time off and work through the feeling. Sometimes you just need to stay in your room in your pajamas for a day and watch for dinner because it gives you comfort. You may want to talk to a friend about why you're feeling so sad. You may want to get involved with other people. You may want to avoid other people. Sometimes you may just need to let yourself feel sad and have a good cry. I've had to learn the difference between the times that I'm sad and the times that I'm depressed because I need to do different things for those two times. I get sad over the news reports some days. I get sad whenever I remember Catherine Elizabeth, my cat, who passed away this past year. Sometimes I get sad over something that has happened during the day. But that's different from when I'm depressed. It's hard to describe what depression is like. For me, when I'm at my worst with depression, which doesn't happen hardly at all these days, but was a way that I lived my life for many years, it was like getting lost in a thick fog that totally disorients you. I don't know if you've ever had to drive in a thick fog, but it's like you don't know where you're going, and it's hard to figure it out. You're looking for somebody's taillights in front of you to follow because you can't find your way. It can feel, and has felt for me, very hopeless, and as if I'm helpless against the emotions I feel. And sometimes it has felt like it was never going to get better, that it was never going to change, and there was no hope. But everyone is different, Everyone experiences depression in different ways and to different degrees. Some common symptoms that many people have is feeling a deep sadness, feeling empty or hopeless. Sometimes they feel guilty over the way that they feel because they think that they ought not to feel this way or that they ought to be able to get a grip on it. Sometimes they lose interest in or no longer get pleasure from things that they always loved to do. Sometimes they're just very irritable and hard to get along with. They might feel very tired. They might sleep too much or too little. I've done both in my life. There have been times whenever I have slept 10 hours at a stretch, and there are times even now where I'll wake up at 2 a.m. and not be able to get back to sleep and just spend the rest of the night walking around the apartment listening to gospel music. It really gets in my steps. Some of you have wondered how I get in 25, 30,000 steps a day. It's because I start at 2 a.m. I don't recommend it. You might have trouble concentrating or thinking clearly or speaking or making decisions. You might have even a difficult time doing basic normal activities like take a shower in the morning or brush your teeth. You might even think frequently about death or suicide. And depression can cause physical symptoms. Weight loss or weight gain is a common symptom of depression. I have battled weight my entire life and battle it still. And weight gain can be one of the side effects of depressive medications, as can weight loss. It depends upon the people, which way they'll go. You can also get undefined and undiagnosed body pains. Back pain is common. Before I came over here, I was sitting in my chair with a heating pad on my back. You can also get bad headaches with depression. So there are a variety of just physical symptoms that can go along with it. But what causes depression? To a certain extent, no one knows. There are so many different causes that it's hard to pinpoint just one. One of the causes of depression, though, is biological. Our brain has certain chemicals called neurotransmitters, and decreases in certain chemicals like serotonin or dopamine likely play a role in depression for some people. There can be a genetic factor. People with a family history of depression are more likely to experience it themselves. And it doesn't have to be a close family member. It may be the fact that you know in the South a second or third cousin twice removed who has depression. But it can run in families. Hormones can play a factor. People with thyroid disease may discover that they have depression and need to take an antidepressant to help with it. Menopause and different stages of menopause may bring on depression. So it can just be your hormones. In addition to all those physical things, there are also environmental factors and life events that can be linked to a higher risk of depression. I've had a lot of conversations in the last week and a half with different people who knew I was doing this presentation. And one of my friends was talking to me this morning about her mother, who's in her 90s. And this year, she had to resign from being the treasurer of her Presbyterian women's group. and she had been treasurer of that group for over 50 years. And she's also discovered that she can't drive the way she used to drive. Now she limits herself to going to Walmart and the hairdresser and church on Sunday morning. But she's having trouble with depression. And one of the questions she frequently asks is, why am I still here? What good am I now? Why am I here when so many of the people I know have already passed away? Those are common questions when people get to our age, and suddenly the job that we use to define ourselves isn't our job anymore. Or we find ourselves not serving on boards, or picking ourselves up and moving to a totally new location away from the friends that we knew or the activities that we took part in. Physical or sexual abuse is a major cause of depression. The death of someone you love. Financial stress can bring on depression. And that too is not uncommon with people our age as our incomes become more limited or we're dependent upon a set income. Substance abuse can cause depression. One of the things that frequently happens is that some people with depression may decide to self-medicate. And so they decide that having not just one drink in the evening, but a bottle in the evening would help them get through the night. That causes more problems than it actually does help. Chronic illness, disability can bring on depression because suddenly you can't physically do things that you always did before. Or you have to ask people to help you do things that you've never had to get help with before. Living with chronic pain can bring on depression. In my case, there were several factors. I grew up in a profoundly abusive family, so physical and sexual abuse played a part in my major depression. And my parents suffered from their own untreated mental illness, which is one of the reasons we were abused. And I have a chemical imbalance. And in my case, that chemical imbalance makes it very difficult to treat it with medication. So instead of just one medication, and I'm going to talk about medications in a few minutes, but instead of one medication, I'm on a cocktail of medications because it takes more than one kind of chemical to try to settle me down. Sometimes depression lasts for just a season. One of the people that I was talking to said that he had become very depressed whenever he was going through a messy divorce. And it took about 6 months of therapy and medication for him to get back on an even keel. But after about 6, 7 months, he was able to end his therapy and his medication and move on. His depression was for a season. For some people, that season may be years. For some people like me, it's a lifetime part of who I am. For me, having depression is like having brown hair that's turning gray and being short. I can't help it, it just is, and I've learned ways to cope with it, thank you very much. I've met lots of very interesting tall people in grocery stores. Everybody's story of depression is different, but there's one thing we all have in common. People with depression are incredibly strong and very courageous. even when we think we're at our weakest, even when we feel anything but courageous. That is who we are, strong and very courageous. We live with an unseen, misunderstood illness that's difficult to treat, and that most people who don't suffer from it cannot begin to comprehend. Each of us finds our own way of coping with it. For me, my greatest gift in my toolbox is my faith. When I no longer have the strength to move forward, I know that God will be there to carry me through. When I feel my most unlovable, I know that God loves me. I can't tell my story without mentioning my faith. I know that Christ descended into hell because he has descended into my hell, and he fought for me there when I could no longer fight for myself. But other people have their own companion, their own strengthener in their journey. For some, it's another person or a group of people. I can't emphasize how helpful support groups can be. It's a safe place to share with other people who have some understanding of what you're going through because they're going through a similar journey. Not your journey, but a similar journey. And they can listen with compassion and understanding, and they can share their own tricks of the trade for getting through to a better time. For some people, it's a therapist, and I can't emphasize enough the difference in life a good therapist or counselor can make. There's something wonderful about going to a place where you can talk honestly about the way that you feel and not try to pretend that it doesn't hurt, that it isn't important. And they too give you tricks of the trade, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. For others, their companion is nature. They get out and they escape into their gardens or into walks around campus. For others, it's music. For others, it's forms of meditation. The list is endless as to how people find a partner to strengthen them with. But it's necessary for each of us to find our own companion that carries us through. And that's going to be different for every person. I've been very blessed, and it's been a blessing. It's not anything else than that. The doctors call me high functioning. I call myself incredibly stubborn. And some of you have already figured that out. I have been very blessed by the fact that somehow, for some reason, God has blessed me with the ability to envision who I wanted to be in my life, and then given me the opportunities to work to become that person, whatever the cost. It is a blessing, and I have the deepest compassion for people who don't have that particular blessing as they fight depression. I have a sign in my kitchen that I read just about every day that says, "Live the life you've always dreamed of." And that's become my motto. My life and my problems may have been different from yours, but for the most part, I've always found the joy that I believe is the basis of life, and that I believe that we were and are all created for. It's a joy that runs deeper than happiness. I'm not lying when you see me in the hallway and you say, "How are you feeling?" and I say, "Great." For the most part these days, I feel great. If I don't, I usually will respond, "I'm fine." I won't tell you what the word fine means. I learned it once in a hospitalization, but let it be known that on those days when I say I'm fine, don't ask for more information and lift up a silent prayer. But I want you to know that you can live with depression and still have joy. You can live with depression, and every moment of every day is not a downer. I'm living proof of that, and so are so many other people that I know. Most of that is because of a life of taking advantage of treatment options. One of the most important treatment options is individual therapy and counseling. Like I said before, that gives you a safe place to talk honestly about what you're feeling, to discover it's a place where they can help you discover the causes for your depression and work through that. Sometimes it's working through it to an acceptance of your position in life at this point in time. It's also a place to learn coping mechanisms. For me, journaling has been very important. I'm a woman of words, and so I've learned to write out feelings that I had always stuffed down and to write out memories that I'd always wanted to deny. That has been probably one of the hardest things in the world for me to learn to do. Meditation and prayer have also been extraordinarily important in my coping mechanisms. And for years now, I've written a daily prayer on Facebook. I know some of you read that every morning. I surround myself with positive affirmations. My favorite cup that I drink out of almost every day says, "You are stronger than you think." I have another favorite cup that says something I can't repeat here, but as kind of also gives me strength in an entirely different format. I have a box of thank you notes that I've kept over the years, and the box itself says things like, listen to your heart, dream big, believe in yourself. And for years, I wrote notes to myself and taped them onto the bathroom mirror. I have a strong belief in positive affirmations for yourself. But again, you'll find your coping mechanisms. You just might need help finding out what's going to work for you. And that's a strong role of counseling and what a good counselor will help you do. Medication, I can't overemphasize the power of the right medications. Like I said, I'm on a cocktail of drugs, and I pray prayers of praise and appreciation for researchers who work continually to try to find new drugs and new ways of testing for depression and what will work to help overcome depression. About 4, maybe 5 years ago, they came out with a new drug that does not take the place of an antidepressant, but helps that antidepressant to work much better in the system. You probably have seen commercials for Rexulti and another drug whose name I can't remember that they've been advertising on TV. When I took that drug for the first time in my life, I couldn't stop smiling because I felt like I thought I had always been meant to felt. And it has made an incredible difference in my life. The difficulty with drugs is there's no blood test for depression. You can't go into an office and somebody draws blood and says, oh, this is the drug you need and this is the dose you need. Prescribing an antidepressant is just as much art as it is science. And the difficulty is you may try an antidepressant, but it usually takes about 4 weeks to become active in your body. And that's when you'll discover whether or not that's the right antidepressant or the right dose. If it's not, you have to try another antidepressant, and it's 4 weeks before it becomes active in your body. So it's a time of trial and error, and it, quite frankly, can be discouraging as you go through that. And sometimes a medication will work wonderfully for a period of time, and then for some reason that no one can explain, it'll become less effective. I'm like that with Prozac. The first time I took Prozac, I thought it was a miracle, and it worked great for about 3 or 4 years. And then I noticed that I was becoming more depressed, and I couldn't figure out why. And finally, we figured out the Prozac had just stopped working, and I had to go on a different drug. And in about 3 or 4 years, Prozac would work again. So one of the things that I always tell people, if they've been working with an antidepressant that has worked really wonderfully and suddenly they find themselves to become depressed, to talk to their doctor about whether or not that's one of the possibilities. I have to tell you, my doctorate is not a medical doctorate, and my advice is just that. And it's sometimes very ineffective and downright wrong. Another treatment form that is not used as often is brain stimulation therapy. TMS is a relatively new form of this. ECT is what you're most familiar with. It's commonly called shock therapy, and it directly stimulates the brain by putting an electrical current through it. And the non-medical description of it is that, from my opinion, from the way I can describe it, is the intent is to kind of reset the brain so that the depression will break. I've had ECT, shock therapy. It's not the horror that it's sometimes portrayed to be in movies. It does have side effects. One of the things for me, it's affected my recall memory. I can know things, but not be able to draw it up as fast as I want to. Memorizing lines for plays can be one of those things. I can know the line and not bring it up as fast as I wish I could. It's one of the reasons why I'm really not that good at trivia. I'll not sit there and know that I know that answer, but I just can't get it up there fast enough. To some extent, it's affected my coordination. I can't dance. I could never dance very well, I'll have to confess, but now my excuse is I had ECT. There are some things that, as people who are walking through depression with someone who may suffer from it, I have some advice. Walk with them. You don't have to give them advice. You don't have to solve their problems. They may not even ever talk to you about their depression, but walk with them. Let them know that you're there. Take physical walks with them if you want. Play with them when playing is a good thing. There's nothing like knowing that someone is there. that someone cares without every moment of every day saying, "So how are you today?" That's not really as helpful as you might think it is. They're there going, or "How do you feel?" With my fingers, "Thank you very much." Things not to say. "I don't understand. What do you have to be depressed about? You have a great life. Count your blessings. You need to just get over it. Pull yourself together. Trust me, there's nothing more than a depressed person wants than to just get over it. They've thought about that. Other things, turn that frown upside down. Have an attitude of gratitude. Don't worry, be happy. You just need to praise God. And I always think, just praise God and pass the ammunition. Things that I absolutely become very angry when I hear people say it. God's made you depressed because he wants to try to teach you something. So you just need to look for the lesson. Or God knows what's best for you, and he's caused this to happen for some reason that you'll find out, and it will all be for the best in the end. Or you need to have more faith. Trust me, very few people have as much faith as depressed or mentally ill people. Just by the fact that they're taking the next step shows how much faith they have. Having said all of that, I want to leave you with two quotes. One is by Marion Coleman, who writes about her journey with depression. She found release in knitting. And like I said, everyone finds their own way. Her way was knitting. But I found her story very much like mine. And this is what she writes. "There's nothing wrong with me. After all, this is the only me I've ever known. But sometimes I need to slow down. I need to check to see if I'm okay, to look at the emotional heap of yarn in my lap, to undo a few rows and try again. I need to know that the things I drop, the things I can't do the way I want, the hard parts of my life are not a failure. They are evidence that I am human." And I want to leave you with one piece of scripture that has comforted me and journeyed with me as I battled my way through moments of my greatest darkness. It's the Native American, one of the Native American versions of the 23rd Psalm. "The Lord is my great Father and Shepherd Chief. I am his, and with him I want not. He throws out to me a rope, and the name of the rope is love. He draws me to where the grass is green and the water is not dangerous. I eat and lie down and am satisfied. Sometimes my heart is very weak and it fails me. But he lifts me up again and draws me into a good road. His name is wonderful. One day he will meet me, and the hunger that I have had in my heart all through this life will be satisfied. He gives me a staff to lean upon. He spreads a table before me with all kinds of good food. He puts his hand upon my head and all the tired is gone. I love that line. My cup he fills till it runs over. What I tell is true. I do not lie. These roads that are away ahead will stay with me through this life and after, until I sit with the shepherd chief forever. Thank you. We do have time for just a few questions or comments if you all have any. And then next week, next Wednesday at 2 o'clock, next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, there'll be an after talk in the second floor living room where I'll be there to answer any questions or to guide a discussion on depression. Yes.
There will be a sign-up sheet, and I'll have it now, and it'll be in the book.
There's a sign-up sheet, and Claire has it now, and it'll also be in the blue book. So we'll have some idea how many people are interested in coming, or if no one's interested in coming. Yes. When I was diagnosed, I was actually in college, but I've been depressed my entire life. So I've been on some form of psych med since I was younger than I can remember. I was in college. Yeah.
Yes, and thank you so much. As being down in healthcare, I'd like to pass on to everyone, if you feel real sad or depressed about ever having the home care, those people care for you and they love you.
Doris wanted to remind everybody that if you're ever worried about having to go down into health care or feel very sad about it, that the nurses and the other staff down there really care for you and will help you in whatever way they can. Yes, Owen.
I've been on Prozac after my wife died, and it's a battle. But I also want to make the comment that, and I've got help from my family through the telephone. But anyway, you talk about you can't bring up something because of your memory. That's typical of me too.
Yeah, not being able to remember things can be very typical of people who have depression. And I'm very proud of the courage you have to not only work through the grief that you have since your wife died, but to talk about it and to bring it up. That's very courageous. Yes, Doris.
I have to say again, Pam, I've been the road pretty much you have,
Mm-hmm.
and I had the difficulty of not being able to pray. I couldn't stop crying. I didn't know why I was crying.
And that's true of many people. And it's been true of me at times that I didn't have the words to pray. I have to say that I believe that God hears the unspoken prayer. That our tears can be prayers enough. And the words that we don't have, God hears. And God responds with love. And that there are, as strong as my faith is, and I've got a strong faith, I'll claim that, but as strong as my faith is, there are times when you do wonder, when you just get angry with God. One of the things that I've learned is God can stand up to my anger. And the other thing I've learned is God gets angry too at the things that we experience. Explain God getting angry. I think that when we live in a fallen world, things are not perfect here. And I think that when God knows our suffering, whatever that suffering is, whatever the cause of that suffering is, I think that makes God very angry that we go through that. And I think it's righteous anger. Yes, Ben.
When you're not having depression, do you have just normal feelings or is there euphoria?
Um, Two ways to answer that. At one time, they thought I was bipolar because I would go from deep depression to feelings of euphoria and great bursts of energy. That calmed down as I got older. And I think that I'm not quite sure what normal is. I would never claim to be normal. And most of you would never accuse me of that either. But most of the time, I'm what other people would think of, I hope, as normal. Although I'm basically a very joy-filled person. I may not always be happy, but I'm very joy-filled. But there are people who suffer from depression who have those moments of euphoria. Some of them are bipolar. Some of them, it's just the fact that the depression is so down that any feeling of up seems like euphoria to them. Does that make sense?
How do you seek help?
Um,
Medical.
for medical help, starting with your physician is a good place to start, in my opinion. Calling a counseling center is a great way to start finding a good counselor. If you're wondering where to start to find a good counselor, talking to somebody in the area who might know counselors. We have a counseling center and Scotland Family Counseling Center. I have their phone number on the card that's back on the card table. There are several counseling centers around the area, particularly in Southern Pines and all of those little towns that go together to make up that conglomeration. Going to a pastor, a pastor may know of some place for you to go. Some pastors are trained in pastoral counseling.
How about behavioral science? How do you feel about that?
Behavioral science is one part of counseling, and I think that that's a beginning point for many people who are interested in studying and going into the field. Henrietta, help me. Am I doing okay? Yes.
Bipolar, you mentioned that earlier. Is that a form of depression or is it completely separate?
Bipolar or manic depressive disorder can be a form of depression. It is its own disorder and uses different medications. And there are different there's bipolar disorder 1 and 2. So it depends upon that. You really need to work with a psychiatrist or your family doctor to determine that and what meds might be most helpful for you. One of the things that I urge people consistently is to know your body, to know how you feel, and to serve as an advocate for yourself. You know whether or not the prescription is working. Your doctor doesn't unless you tell him or her. So sometimes you need to be an advocate. You need to say, I know that we were real hopeful this would work, but it's not. And work with them to find the next step. Pardon?
Bipolar, does that make a person want to sleep a lot?
It can. Some people want to sleep a lot. Some people don't want to sleep at all. It kind of depends upon the individual. One of the things about any form of depression or mental illness, and a lot of illnesses, is we're individuals. We were created unique and special in our own right, and so our bodies respond differently to different things. So what one person it may be wonderful for won't work at all for someone else. And that's true with things like journaling. Journaling works brilliantly for me. It might not work at all for someone else. The last thing they want is to look at a blank sheet of paper with a pen in their hand. It reminds them of being in 7th grade, and they didn't like it then either. So you have to look at how your body is responding to a particular drug. Thank you all so much. You have been patient and a gracious audience. Oh, yes. I'm sorry.
I did have one question.
Yeah.
One thing you did was anxiety. And I deal with that. And depression. And the other thing was anger.
Anger. For some people with depression, for me, let me speak to me. Learning to express anger was incredibly difficult. And that's because of the way I grew up. Anger was something to fear, not something that was a healthy emotion. Anger is a healthy emotion. You have to have healthy ways to release it. One of the things that I found incredibly helpful to express anger was bowling. There was something wonderful about knocking down those pins and hearing them fall. It was just really wonderful. I even took up handball because I loved the thwack. I was very bad at it. I can't play handball at all, but I loved the thwack of that ball hitting the wall. I've torn up more phone books than I can count. So there are healthy ways, and again, you'll find your own way. Some people express their anger through running. If somebody tried to attack me, I just have to sit there and fall down because I couldn't outrun them if I tried. But some people find that very therapeutic. So expressing anger and realizing that anger is a very healthy emotion is extremely important. And I have to tell you, there's play rehearsal in this room in 5 minutes. And the cast is beginning to wander in. So I think that if you have other questions or things that you would like to discuss next Tuesday at 2:00 in the upstairs room, and you can see Claire to sign up or sign up in the blue book.
Thank you again.
Thank you so much. I had no idea that we were going to hear what you gave us today. And I'll say, wow, it blew me away. And I want to thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I also, living as a close neighbor to you, I'm glad that you finally gave me the definitions of great and fine. Because now I know how to accept you. Stick around next month. We'll have another one. I can't get over how this program has just taken off and how much we have learned over the last 5, 6 years. So thank you all for coming out.